Hey, Wellness Warriors, welcome to the Burnout Resolution podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mylaine Riobé, and today we're tackling whether or not you can biohack your way out of burnout. As an integrative medical doctor, I've seen thousands of clients over the years looking to resolve burnout, fatigue, and exhaustion. They come to me through two different pathways. One is as a one-on-one medical consultant in my private medical practice, and the other is through my online programs for burnout resolution. Almost every client has tried one biohack or another, or multiple biohacks over time, trying to get themselves out of burnout. And the vast majority of the time, these biohacks don't seem to work. So we're going to explore why that happens and how you might be able to actually use biohacks in a way that is favorable to get you out of burnout. Now, in my personal opinion, I don't believe there is such a thing as a biohack per se. I don't think you can necessarily hack your way to anything. There are no shortcuts in our physiology. And in my book, Faith, I have a chapter dedicated to shortcuts are short circuits. So in order for what we're calling a biohack to actually work for us, it has to flow with our physiology. If it doesn't flow with our physiology and help our physiology to move in the right direction, it backfires. And we'll dive deep into why that happens to people. Everybody's trying to get themselves out of burnout because it's so hard to get the help they need. Our mainstream medical model really doesn't have a means to do the proper testing and to really get to the heart of why people burn out. Mental health professionals serve a huge role in burnout resolution, but that's only one piece of the puzzle. Burnout is a two-sided coin. It's an emotional issue, whether it's work or our lifestyles that are burning us out, or just modern living, right? There's so many challenges today in our modern lifestyles that burn us out. So there's that emotional side of the coin, and then there's the physical side of the coin. And if you're not addressing both sides of the coin, you're not going to break free of burnout. We don't really have a system of medicine within our healthcare structure as it currently stands that addresses burnout completely. The closest system of medicine that we have for that is integrative or functional medicine. I have clients who have attempted cold plunges, infrared saunas, intermittent fasting, ketogenic diets, cryotherapy, microbiome testing, and probiotic therapies, where they use their wearables and follow the recommendations that the wearables tell them to do. And the list goes on and on and on. And it's very hit or miss when people try to biohack their way out of burnout. Not only is it hit or miss, but sometimes they actually make themselves way sicker. And I've had clients think it was because they didn't do it long enough or they didn't do it right, and they kept trying to do it over and over again, only to feel worse, no matter how they modify the technique. So whether it's in our one-on-one sessions in a medical practice setting or in our online courses for burnout resolution, the number one reason that these biohacks don't work for people is because those people did not know their dynamic metabolic type before they did the biohack. So it was a guessing game at that point. You can imagine that cold plunges in cryotherapy, where you're making your body super cold, would be drastically different than, for example, an infrared sauna, where you're making your body super hot. Now, while people may think that on the surface, there's no consequences to doing things like that because they'll say, well, the cryotherapy is only for a few minutes. As you do that on a repetitive basis, it does actually start to shift the inside physiology of your body. If it's going against the physiology of your body, that's going to make you even worse. If it happens to be going with the physiology of your body to get it in a more balanced state, then you'll feel better. Burnout is already an imbalanced state. Something is off in the body where you're not meeting your body's demand. The supply is not meeting the demand for some reason. That could be for multiple reasons. It could be because there's not enough supply, so things are missing in your body. You may have nutrient deficiencies, hormone deficiencies, be missing other components that are necessary for your metabolism to actually function, to meet the demands of your body. You get this supply-demand mismatch because there's not enough supply. It could also be due to excessive demand. You're not sleeping enough, not getting enough rest in general, or there's too much stress. So you may not have deficiencies per se, but you still don't have enough to meet the increased demand. And that creates the supply-demand mismatch, which creates the burnout. So in any one of these scenarios where the supply is not meeting the demand and there's a big supply-demand mismatch, we call that a deficient dynamic metabolic type. And temperature really matters with dynamic metabolic typing, which is the main factor in why doing, for example, cryotherapy, where you're making your body too cold, if you're already too cold, is going to take you even further away from a balanced state and more into an imbalanced state. That's going to make your burnout worse. If you're too hot, if you have a hot dynamic metabolic type, that means you feel too warm already. So if you're doing an infrared sauna and you're already too hot, you're going to take your body even more out of balance, and that's going to make you feel even worse. Knowing your dynamic metabolic type helps you sort your way through all the different biohacks so that you know exactly which ones would work for you and which ones would harm you. It's really important to know, and it's actually pretty easy to find out once you understand the concept of what's a dynamic metabolic type and which one of the 6 am I representing in this moment. And then once I know my dynamic metabolic type, once I know the quality of the biohack that I'm about to do, I'll be able to know before I even try it. So it's not a trial and error thing. I already know I have this dynamic metabolic type. And so the following biohacks are going to harm me, and these biohacks are going to help me. And we'll show you how to do that today as well. For whatever the reason may be, you're not eating enough or you have malabsorption, like something's going on where you don't have enough of certain things that you need, vitamins, minerals, hormones, enzymes. The supply is not there to meet the demand, or the demand is too excessive to meet a normal supply. We call that a deficient dynamic metabolic type. And it's important to know that the reason of your burnout is because you're not meeting the demands for some reason. That's extremely important to know to get yourself out of burnout, because the strategy that you would employ to get yourself out of burnout would be to either lower the demand to meet the supply or raise the supply to meet the demand so that you narrow the gap. So knowing you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type helps you to know that that's the strategy that's going to work the best for me to get out of burnout. On the other side, we have an excess dynamic metabolic type. So you can be in burnout because you have too much of things in your body, and that's actually obstructing your metabolism. In other words, it's in the way of your metabolism. So it's not that your metabolism is too weak, it's that things are in its way. So we call that an excess dynamic metabolic type because there's stuff in your body that doesn't belong there that's kind of gunking up the system. It's blocking the system from flowing. Like the water doesn't come out of the faucet, not because there's not enough water in the faucet, but because something is blocking. There's debris and calcification obstructing the pipe, and the water doesn't come out for that reason. That's an excess dynamic metabolic type. Metabolically, what that is inflammation, toxins, heavy metals. It could be toxins in the form of poorly broken down hormones, everyday garden variety toxins such as plastic, phthalate, hormone mimickers, which we find in plastics and animals, for example, that are fed artificial hormones. We have these hormone mimickers that serve as toxins in our bodies. If this accumulates enough, it's going to obstruct the flow of metabolism. And you're going to be burnt out because your metabolism just can't move past those obstructions. So we call that an excess dynamic metabolic type. The goal here is not necessarily to make the supply meet the demand, but instead to get rid of the junk that's obstructing the ability of the metabolism to move and flow. So the strategy in an excess dynamic metabolic type is to drain out the toxins, get rid of the inflammation while you're protecting your metabolic stores. For a deficient dynamic metabolic type, we have to increase metabolism by providing the supply that's missing, whether it's the nutrients, the hormones, the enzymes, whatever it is that's missing, we replace. And that helps to narrow the gap that's causing the burnout, and that helps you feel better. Over here, the excess dynamic metabolic type, it's draining out the junk. So whether it's a monitored cleanse or a detox, this is where saunas come in because saunas help to detox the body. They're also putting heat into the body. And so this is where once you know if you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type or an excess dynamic metabolic type, the next step is to know what is my temperature, not your body temperature, like when I put a thermometer in my mouth, what's the temperature? How do I feel? What is the sensation of temperature in my body? Do I feel cold compared to most other people? Do I feel warm compared to most other people? Or do I feel neutral compared to most other people? If you're the friend that every time you go out with your other friends, you're the one that's got the jacket on and they're all fine, you're a cold dynamic metabolic type. If you're the one duking it out with family members to crank up the AC because you feel hot and nobody else in the house does, you're a hot dynamic metabolic type. Now, sometimes that matches your actual body temperature, but it doesn't have to. So this is how you know I'm a cold dynamic metabolic type or I'm a hot dynamic metabolic type. Now you match that with whether or not you're a deficient or an excess. Now you know your dynamic metabolic type. So there are 6 different dynamic metabolic types. There's 3 on each side of the main categories we talked about. So there are 3 dynamic metabolic types that are deficient. So we have the hot deficient dynamic metabolic type, the cold deficient dynamic metabolic type, and then the temperature neutral deficient dynamic metabolic type. Same on the excess side. So we'll have the hot excess, the cold excess, and the temperature neutral excess. Now, how you know which of those you flow into, there's 5 simple questions that we ask in our online program through our burnout assessment that helps you very quickly know if you're deficient or excess, if you're hot, cold, or temperature neutral. We go over this in our 7-day metabolic reset challenge so that you know exactly how to tackle these biohacks if you want to try them. So as an example, why cryotherapy doesn't work for everyone and why cold plunges don't work for everyone is because not everyone is a hot dynamic metabolic type. So in order to correct a cold excess dynamic metabolic type, not only do you have to drain out the inflammation, the toxins, or whatever it is that's gunking up the mechanism, blocking metabolism, you also have to get rid of the coldness. Because what coldness does, if you're the one that feels cold all the time, that means that things are also sluggish in your body. Just like in nature, when we cool things down too much, they will literally freeze and stop moving. The same thing happens in the body, except the body is much, much more sensitive than the planet. So whereas the planet can tolerate wild temperature fluctuations, the human body cannot. You have all kinds of mechanisms in your body keeping your temperature very stable and very consistent. So if you start feeling cold, that is the first sign that your body is not capable of doing that. It's not capable of keeping your body temperature even so that you don't feel hot or cold. Now, of course, environmental factors matter, right? If it's 99 degrees out, you should feel hot, right? If it's 0 degrees out, probably feel cold, right? That's appropriate. It's when it's inappropriate that it matters. It's when it's inappropriate that it's pathological, that it's causing a problem. When you're a cold excess dynamic metabolic type, that means the coldness that's in your body is going to collapse blood vessels. When we're cold, the blood vessels close on purpose. That's why tips of our fingers get numb and white. Some people even have a condition called Raynaud's disease, is because they're already too cold. So their extremities are already struggling to maintain normal body temperature. So when they go out in a cold temperature, that gets worse. So when you're too cold, your blood vessels have a tendency to collapse and close, which means your circulation is going to be obstructed. It's not going to be able to flow properly. And things move more slowly when they're cold. So this is why people that are cold excess feel burnt out. The solution to that is to warm yourself back up to normal temperature sensation. You don't want to do cryotherapy and cold plunges. If you're a cold excess, you're going to make yourself even worse. So just because it works for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And this is why results are all over the place with cold plunges. Cold plunges work for people that have hot excess dynamic metabolic types. The plunge is like a shock. It's mobilizing your energy. So it's draining. Things that hypermobilize from shock or stress are draining because they're moving energy around in a shocking way. Now, because it's cold, it's also going to make you sluggish at the same time. So you have that initial shock of it being draining and then putting more cold into an already cold body. If you're super hot in excess, that mobilization, that shock of your energy is going to be helpful to get the excess out. If you're too hot, being in a cold plunge or cryotherapy is going to close the gap on that heat and make you more neutral temperature. That's actually going to help your body improve because you're making something that was too hot more normal temperature. This is why cold plunges work really well for hot excess dynamic metabolic type. And they will make somebody with a cold deficient dynamic metabolic type feel beyond awful, or a cold excess as well. So the reason the person with the cold deficient dynamic metabolic type is going to feel the worst is because it's a draining type of procedure. It's shocking your body, mobilizing energy. If you're already a deficient dynamic metabolic type, you already had that big supply demand mismatch, and now you lower the supply even more because you've done something that's draining you out, and you've increased the demand because you've done something that shocked your body, increased your stress. Now you've widened the supply demand mismatch instead of closing it. And that's why you're going to feel even worse if you're a cold deficient dynamic metabolic type and you do a cold plunge. The cold deficient would benefit from an infrared sauna where there's heat coming into the body. But you want to be careful because a sauna, right, it implies it's going to make you sweat. So you want the heat, but not really so much the sweat. If you can avoid sweating too much and have the heat still bring your temperature up, so it's like a dry heat, that would be much better. A heat lamp would be very beneficial in that case. Because if you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type, what does sweating do? Sweating removes things from your body. So it's going to lower the supply. So you want to be careful not to widen the supply-demand mismatch. A heat lamp is something we use in acupuncture. The vast majority of times we're doing acupuncture, we'll put the heat lamp on the belly or an area that might be experiencing pain or discomfort. We'll put a heat lamp on it. That's actually infrared heat, but it's dry heat. It doesn't make you sweat. So it's tonifying. It's not just making you warmer and draining you at the same time like an infrared sauna would. If you can get your hands on an infrared heat lamp, that would be more beneficial if you're a cold deficient dynamic metabolic type. Now, if you're a cold excess dynamic metabolic type, an infrared sauna would work really well. The heat of the infrared is going to make the cold better. It's going to increase the heat of your body, make you less cold. So it's going to neutralize your temperature, and the sauna is going to drain out the toxin. So if you're a cold excess, that means you have extra stuff gunking up your metabolism, making it not flow. Then you have the cold on top of that, making everything stagnant. So it's just making it even worse. So you want to make yourself warmer, not too hot, but warmer, so that at the end of the day, you don't feel hot or cold on any given day. And you become temperature neutral. That's the goal. So you want to do the opposite of what you are to get there. So if you're too cold, you want to make yourself warmer. So the infrared heat is perfect. And if you're excess, you want to drain that excess out. So the sweating is actually beneficial. The dynamic metabolic type that benefits the most from an infrared sauna is a cold excess dynamic metabolic type. The dynamic metabolic type that would be best suited to cold plunges and cryotherapy would be a hot excess dynamic metabolic type. Those are the people that have too much junk gunking up the system and they're too hot. They feel warm all the time compared to other people. Sometimes their body temperature might be just a little bit above the 98.6 it's supposed to be, or they might say things like, my doctors always think I'm sick. There's nothing wrong with me because my regular normal temperature is 99 degrees or something like that. To know if you're an excess dynamic metabolic type, typically you'll feel worse if you're sitting still for extended periods. You'll feel sleepy and you feel like you have to keep getting up and moving around, or you'll shift in your chair all the time so that you don't fall asleep or feel worse. Those are the people that feel better if they work out. They have an excess dynamic metabolic type. They have to keep mobilizing their bodies to keep moving these toxins to try and get rid of them so they don't gunk up the mechanisms of their metabolism. These are the people with the excess dynamic metabolic types. If you're hot excess, what that's loosely saying is that you have a lot of acidity in your body. Acids are hot. They literally make you feel warmer than you should feel. You can also kind of tell a hot excess dynamic metabolic type by their behavior. They tend to speak loudly. They tend to be very animated. Like we can think of a Tony Robbins, for example. He loves his cold plunges, right? Because he's probably a hot excess dynamic metabolic type. Now, I don't know him at all. I've never evaluated him. So it's just an educated guess based on my observation of him. So you can tell he's very expressive, very animated, very high energy. Like, so you can tell like, oh, he's probably an excess dynamic metabolic type. So these things suit him really well. And so, yes, if you're hot excess, cold plunges, cryotherapy, those will do you a lot of good for some time until you become neutral. And then you'll want to shift your strategy after that. Now, if you are a hot deficient dynamic metabolic type, so for a hot deficient, you don't really want to do cold plunges or cryotherapy either because of the shock, again, the stress. So you're going to increase demand and not increase supply. So you want to be very cautious. The temperatures will match because you're too hot and you're adding cold so that you neutralize your temperature, but it's going to come at the expense of your supply. So you already have too little supply, which is why you're deficient dynamic metabolic type. So you're going to lose your supply. So you're not really going to benefit very much if you're losing out of one side what you're putting in from the other side, right? It's like trying to fill up a gas tank that has a hole in it. So knowing your dynamic metabolic type helps you very quickly know, okay, this is going to work, but this isn't going to work. If you don't know your dynamic metabolic type and you're super curious, I encourage you to join our 7-day Metabolic Reset Challenge. We go through dynamic metabolic typing and guide you on how to start applying this information to your general life, to start getting yourself out of burnout in a way where you are informed before you try the hack so that you don't get yourself into deeper trouble. These one-size-fits-all biohacks don't take that into account. They don't personalize the biohack for the individual. It becomes this trial and error thing, which is why it's so hit or miss for people. Same thing with fasting and ketogenic diets. Both of those are restrictive, either in what you're eating in the case of a ketogenic diet or when you're eating in the case of intermittent fasting. Anything that is restrictive is going to be draining because you're reducing supply in some form or fashion. Anything that reduces supply is draining. It's literally coming out. Or we could see it as detoxing in a way, but you don't want to detox or cleanse a system that is depleted. If you have a deficient dynamic metabolic type, you don't want to deplete yourself even more. This is why intermittent fasting and ketogenic diets can actually backfire on people, especially women. We have, unfortunately, some inherent biology that allow our modern lifestyles to drain us out more than they should. If you didn't see my podcast episode on why women have to work harder to stay healthy, I encourage you to watch that. It's very eye-opening in terms of answering some of the questions about why women get more chronic diseases than men, why women have an astounding 80% of diagnosed autoimmune conditions compared to 20% of autoimmune conditions diagnosed in men, and why women have more depression and anxiety than men. But our biology, it's not that it sets us up to fail, it's our modern living that has set us up to fail, so to speak. It depletes us more than it should. Many women are already a bit deficient just by their nature because we menstruate in particular, and we're literally losing blood once a month for decades of our lives. Our supply tends to not be as robust as men's, comparatively speaking. It's not uncommon for women to be a deficient dynamic metabolic type. You can still have toxins and inflammation from deficiency, which we call a mixed dynamic metabolic type. But underneath all the toxins piling up, there's usually some level of deficiency in women. So you want to be very measured. And when you have a one size fits all solution like intermittent fasting or a ketogenic diet, and you're going in already somewhat depleted, these depleting types of diets are again going to drop your supply. While they're anti-inflammatory on one side, they're draining, they're using up a supply that you already didn't really have enough of in order to get the toxins out, in order to be anti-inflammatory, to get the inflammation out. It's coming at a price. While you're reducing the junk that's obstructing your flow of your metabolism, you're doing it at the expense of your metabolism. And so you're maintaining that supply-demand mismatch that was already causing your burnout. And so this is why these therapies don't work for very long in women, if at all. Now, if you happen to be an excess dynamic metabolic type and you do intermittent fasting, you do a ketogenic diet, you will see a benefit until you're no longer excessive, until your dynamic metabolic type shifts. If you keep doing a restrictive diet, you're going to become depleted by that diet. We see this a lot in forums online, especially from women. They'll say, it worked and then it backfired, or it never worked. I felt terrible. I tried it. And then they'll be encouraged to just keep doing it. Your body will get used to it. It's not that your body is getting used to you dwindling your supply. It's that it's going to shut off enough body functions where it's going to force itself to meet the demand in a pathological way. It's going to make two wrongs equal a right. If that supply-demand mismatch gets too big, your body will make two wrongs equal a right by lowering its demand. In other words, turning off non-essential body functions, lowering metabolism so that it can literally ration its resources. If the supply is too low, your body understands that very clearly as a threat, and it's going to put itself on a food chain, and it's going to turn off non-essential functions. Not 100% off, but it's going to suppress them. It's going to maybe have them operating at 50% capacity instead of 100. The tissues that are at the bottom of the food chain are hair follicles, skin cells, musculoskeletal tissues. So this is where we get dry hair, hair thinning, hair loss, dry skin, rashes, acne, rapid aging, joint aches, muscle pain, inflammation, even arthritis. These things develop when your body perceives doesn't have enough supply to meet demand, so it starts to shut down demand. That means your body's going to burn fewer calories. You don't want that. You want your body burning optimal calories to burn those optimal calories so that your whole body is functioning. If your body has to ration and put itself on a food chain, it's going to prioritize things that are important for immediate survival, your heart and your lungs, deprioritize things that are not essential for survival, hair growth, skin health, musculoskeletal tissues, connective tissues. Your body doesn't think those are important for immediate survival. Now, people will say, but we need to run when we're under threat. If the body thinks I'm under threat in fight or flight, won't it preserve my muscles? The answer is no, it won't, because you don't use oxygen in fight or flight responses. And the vast majority of our muscle mass uses oxygen. We have muscle cells that we call anaerobic muscles, or what we call red fibers. And then we have white fibers, which are the oxygen-using fibers. Your whole muscle doesn't need to use oxygen. So the parts that would require oxygen would not really be fed as much, and you would lose muscle mass as a result of that. That is literally your body burning fewer and fewer calories. You don't want to do that because you're susceptible to inflammation, those toxins coming back because your immune system is not a top priority to your body. So it's not going to control inflammation as optimally. It's not going to control detoxification as optimally because that's not a priority to your body when it thinks it's in survival mode. Survival mode means my heart's beating, my lungs are breathing, and I'm good. That's literally what survival means to your body. Now, that would make us feel absolutely horrible, right? Because we want our hair to grow. We want healthy looking skin. We don't want to age rapidly. We don't want to be in a bunch of pain and lose our muscle mass, right? But your body doesn't care about that when it has this huge supply demand mismatch that it has to handle on a daily basis. So we don't want to make that worse. When we're doing intermittent fasting, ketogenic diets, things like that, and we already have a deficient dynamic metabolic type, The initial success that people think they have is because it's anti-inflammatory. So whatever toxins were sitting on top of all that deficiency, you're going to temporarily feel better as that is relieved, that's moved out of your body. But what's going to happen is you're going to become more and more depleted. And this is what we hear thousands of women say, that it made me so tired I couldn't do it anymore. So they got the initial benefit of it being anti-inflammatory, but it came at a high price. So you don't necessarily want to be an intermittent faster if you have a deficient dynamic metabolic type. So who does that work for? People that are excess dynamic metabolic types. The people that say intermittent fasting is the best thing ever and my ketogenic diet is amazing are the people that have an excess dynamic metabolic type. The ones that say I was curled up in a fetal position after doing this for 2 weeks and I felt way worse, those are the ones that had deficient dynamic metabolic types. So again, if you know your dynamic metabolic type, if it's going to work, you don't have to torture yourself through all that trial and error. This one-size-fits-all approach to well-being can be potentially dangerous and unnecessary. So knowing your dynamic metabolic type spares you all that agony. So why does intermittent fasting and a ketogenic diet help an excess dynamic metabolic type? And that, whether you're hot, cold, or temperature neutral, doesn't matter. It's the fact that you're excess is because they were very restrictive, right? Again, either in what you're eating as the ketogenic diet or when you're eating as the intermittent fasting. That means they are draining by their nature. And that's why they are anti-inflammatory or detoxing or cleansing. Now, there comes a point where the method, the biohack, has done its work. If you keep doing it, once you have leveled out, if you keep doing it and you think it's a maintenance strategy now, you're going to run into trouble because those biohacks have very specific directions they are taking your metabolism. So cold plunges are taking you into feeling colder and being cleansed and drained out. So there comes a point where you could drive yourself into a cold dynamic metabolic type, even if you started as a hot dynamic metabolic type to do the cold plunge. So you want to also be aware of when it's time to quit. All it's going to do for me now, I need to maintain my gains. When you're trying to get to the top of the mountain to feel better and to get rid of burnout, you want to know when you've reached that point and not keep doing the same restrictive things that brought you there so you don't go down the other side of the mountain and run into all kinds of other trouble there. So you want to find that Goldilocks zone once you've done that hack, and then you stop the hack and you go into a maintenance plan, which is also personalized, right? Because everyone is different in terms of their need and their metabolic requirements. So now let's talk about peptides. Peptides are proteins, essentially. GLP-1 agonists are peptides. Also, insulin is a peptide, as well as growth hormone releasing hormone. These are all natural things that your body already knows how to do. Peptides are essentially short distance messengers. So they're local in the tissues and they're essentially giving the cells a message. Heal this tissue, repair that, make this, send this over there. It's essentially a signal, a short distance signal as compared to hormones. Hormones are also proteins, but they are long distance signals. Hormones are also messengers. So peptides and hormones actually work very synergistically. Hormones are like blueprints or the conductor of an orchestra reading the sheet music. And then peptides are more localized, like each individual musician playing their piece with their sheet music in front of them. So the orchestra doesn't do well without the conductor, can't operate without the musician knowing their own individual thing that they do as part of the orchestra. So this is how hormones and peptides are somewhat related to each other. Hormones we can measure more or less. Peptides are really hard to measure, so we don't really know exactly how to replace them. So it becomes, again, this trial and error, one size fits all type of approach. And very often they don't work for that reason. So if there's a function that's missing in your body and it's due to a hormone being depleted, using a peptide is not going to fix the fact that you're missing the hormone. For example, music not sounding well in the orchestra, not recognizing it's because there's no conductor and trying to fix the sheet music of the individual musicians, right? It's not going to work. So this is why we see peptides hit or miss, not really fully working for people as a strategy. It's more of a hack. We hear of compounds like BPC 157, which is supposed to protect the body, protect the ligaments, protect the stomach, heal the gut, have anti-inflammatory effects. But again, there are so many causes of inflammation that if you're not treating the cause of the inflammation and all you're doing is to signal an anti-inflammatory effect, you're not going to get anywhere. Same thing with the GLP-1 agonists, right? We're seeing so many reports now of people getting sick on them. And all you have to know about the safety of a compound is to look up its potential side effects. So we can see potential side effects of GLP-1 agonists having a lot of involvement of the gastrointestinal system. So we can already know without ever starting on a GLP-1 agonist that it's going to influence our gastrointestinal function. Now, obviously, it's a weight loss drug, so it's implied. But the problem is that it imbalances the gastrointestinal system. And knowing how important the gastrointestinal system is now, especially the microbiome, it's easy to see why people get super sick on GLP-1 agonists. The problem is we can't get off of them when we get on them. So we have superstars telling everybody to be on one of these things when they have no medical background to know the consequences of using that particular product. What happens to people, unfortunately, is you're eroding your metabolism. But GLP-1 agonists will make you feel like you're not hungry because it alters that center. So you'll eat a lot less and you won't be hungry. But again, remember that if you're a deficient dynamic metabolic type, and the reason you're gaining weight is because your body is not burning enough calories because of the huge supply-demand mismatch. If you take a GLP-1 agonist, you are lowering the demand by making yourself less hungry. But the problem is the way that the drug works is by reducing your supply. So you're just continuing to leave that gap, and it's forcing your body to lose muscle mass because it's very draining. So because it's draining, you're going to lose some of the inflammation that was making you have the weight gain. And because it's draining, it's going to force your body to mobilize some fatty tissue, but that's going to come at the expense of your metabolism because it's draining. You're going to burn fewer and fewer calories while you're using this drug. So when you get off the drug, now your body is burning so fewer calories than when you started on the drug that you just gain your weight back. Then you have to go back on the drug. And it just keeps eroding metabolism. And eventually people get sick because you can only erode your metabolism so far before the body breaks and we get an actual disease. People report being exhausted on these drugs, having low motivation, even sometimes depression, because of the impact on the gastrointestinal system. So I'm not saying there's no role for peptides. If you are at significant risk of death due to obesity, then a GLP-1 agonist may save your life. But unfortunately, the way that it's been assimilated into our culture as just this quick weight loss thing to get ready for a wedding or to look good in this particular outfit you want to wear to a party is not the right signal to be sending, in my opinion. I do believe that over the years, we will see just how dangerous these GLP-1 agonists are. Perhaps in the future, when we develop better testing and we can really determine which peptides may be deficient and we're replacing them to provide balance into the body, then perhaps they would be more beneficial. We can do that with hormones. We just can't really do that with peptides. So until we can do that with peptides, I tend to shy away from them as a solution. So the next biohack is microbiome hacking. The microbiome is extremely important to the point where the gastrointestinal system of the human being was deemed the most complex ecosystem on the entire planet Earth. What makes it complex is the microbiome, literally. I did a whole podcast on probiotics, so if you haven't seen that one, I would encourage you to watch it. We talked a lot about the microbiome in that podcast, but for the purposes of today's podcast, as a biohack, taking probiotics or prebiotics as a one-size-fits-all solution will backfire on most people. I would say probably in my private one-on-one practice, I'd say almost half of my clients come in already taking probiotics. And they learned about them online, or they did a little bit of research on them, or they even had a microbiome test done. There were specific probiotics recommended. What we're learning based on the latest scientific evidence is microbiome hacking is potentially dangerous. and can actually induce infections in the gastrointestinal system, which then imbalances the microbiome even more. So what people don't usually know is that the reason the microbiome goes out of balance in the first place is usually due to stress and or gastrointestinal infections that are unseen by our regular medical model. So there are certain infections you get in the gastrointestinal system that you know, right? You have food poisoning, you went out with a bunch of friends and had something to eat, and within the next several hours you get sick, right? You may have vomiting, loose stools, bloating, abdominal pain. It's acute, it comes, it goes. Within a day or so, you feel better, right? We all recognize it. It makes itself known. We cannot ignore it. The types of gastrointestinal infections I'm talking about are the ones we don't even notice that we have. They don't happen like food poisoning. It's not one toxic bacteria that we consumed that blew up in our gastrointestinal system and wreaked havoc. These are everyday bacteria that are surrounding us just from day to day. They might be on an apple that we're eating, in our salad, on a glass that we're drinking, or utensil that we're eating with. They're just kind of regular, everyday garden variety bugs. They're not necessarily food poisoning bugs. The thing about what imbalances the microbiome is stress. Stress will imbalance the microbiome. Emotions actually influence the microbiome. And this is how emotions influence our gastrointestinal system. People feel stress in their gut. They have intuition in their gut, for example, like something's not quite right, they'll feel it in their gut. That's the microbiome being influenced by environmental factors, emotional factors. The food that we eat influences the microbiome. There are studies to show that changing your diet within 2 to 3 days, there are perceptible changes in the microbiome. So the microbiome is very adaptable. It changes and shifts as necessary. When we find that when we do a microbiome test, the microbiome is out of whack, there's a reason for it. Like the microbiome is doing that on purpose for a reason. So hacking the microbiome generally does not work until we find the cause of why the microbiome was imbalanced. If you do a microbiome test and it comes back that your Akkermansia is low, there's a reason for that. It's not random. Taking Akkermansia as a probiotic is not going to solve the problem. And in fact, it can imbalance the microbiome in a whole other direction and increase the risk of infection if you don't already have one. The microbiome is extremely intelligent. Microbiome testing doesn't necessarily diagnose infection, so we'd have to do separate testing for that. Although now it's starting to be incorporated, where we'll see what they call pathogenic bacteria or non-microbiome bacteria that are in the stool with the microbiome. And this is often what is causing the imbalance. They have other unwelcomed guests invading their territory, so to speak. Some of those unwelcomed guests may be killing off some of the members of the microbiome, maybe causing some of the members of the microbiome to overgrow and be excessive in their counts as a response to the unwelcomed visitors. We need to know that there's an infection in the microbiome, within the microbiome, and surrounding the microbiome. It could be in the small intestine, it could be in the large intestine, it could be in both places. You have to know that. The hack is getting rid of the infection, is getting rid of the unwelcomed guests. It's not taking a probiotic or a prebiotic. When you take a prebiotic, what you're doing is you're feeding the microbiome. Prebiotics with an E, P-R-E, is just food. It could be different types of fiber, green bananas, green plantains, oatmeal. Those are all prebiotics. The problem is if you have unwelcomed visitors amongst the microbiome, you're feeding them too, and they're getting stronger, and they're going to imbalance the microbiome even more. And people can have symptoms when they do that, right? They can feel more bloating and more nausea and have more constipation or loose stools when they're taking a prebiotic and the microbiome is out of balance. But again, it's not just a matter of let me replace the parts of the microbiome that are low. It's let me find out why the microbiome is behaving that way, because they're extremely intelligent. So the microbiome is about 200 trillion or so bacteria. that live in our gastrointestinal system, in the colon or the large intestine specifically. The reason they're extremely important is that because they perform millions of different functions for us that we really cannot perform for ourselves. The microbiome, you might have heard me say this before, has approximately 4 million genes that code for proteins and body functions for us and them. Within our own bodies, our own structural cells of our own bodies only have 25,000 genes. So they have 4 million, we have 25,000. That means the vast majority of our body function originates because of the microbiome. So yes, if your microbiome is out of balance, that's a big deal. But knowing how to rebalance it is extremely important, and it is not a one-size-fits-all solution. And probiotics are not the way to rebalance it. And prebiotics may not be the way either if there's infection. For the microbiome hacking, you have to, number one, know, do I have an infection in my gut? It's not always clear in regular medicine, right? CAT scans don't show these infections. Even if you go to a lab and you have a stool analysis, they will miss quite a few different types of infections. In functional medicine, we do what we call breath tests and what we call functional stool analyses, where we test the microbiome and we look for infections and we look for small bowel infections, or what we call SIBO, and yeast and parasites and all the organisms that can cause imbalance in the microbiome, causing it to be dysfunctional. Before you do a microbiome hack, that's number one. Do I or don't I have an infection? If I have an infection, the way to hack the microbiome is to take the infection off its back and to treat the infection, whether it's SIBO, which can be a long road for treatment. There may be multiple protocols that you need to use to get rid of the SIBO, which I've done some podcasts for that as well that you can refer to. And then if there's yeast or parasites and large bowel infections as well with bacteria, those need to be cleared out as well. Once you clear that out, then you feed the microbiome. The hack is the prebiotic, not the probiotic. The difference between a prebiotic and a probiotic is, as we said before, the prebiotic is food, fibers, and things that the good bacteria eat. You don't want to feed the enemy, you only feed the ones you want to proliferate and be healthy in your gut. Probiotics are the actual bacteria that make up the microbiome that we're dumping into the gut. Sometimes in astounding amounts, like 200 billion, 20 billion, what we call colony forming units, or CFUs. Now, the idea of probiotics was a functional medicine, integrative medicine strategy that was employed because of what we used to think about the microbiome. When we first understood the microbiome and we were just scratching the surface, we thought that there were only 3 species of bacteria. We made these assumptions that there's only 3 species in the microbiome. It must be really vulnerable to antibiotics. It must be really susceptible to the environment, and so they probably get killed off very easily. So we should replace them when we use antibiotics, or if we perceive that someone might be missing these bacteria. Well, come to find out in 2012 that there are not 3 species in the microbiome. There's actually 200 species. Now what we understand is the microbiome is actually much more resilient than we thought. Now that doesn't mean when you use antibiotics that there isn't some damage to the microbiome. We might lose some of the species, but we will not lose all 200. Probiotics are generally broad and not narrow in their scope. So what happens when you take large doses of probiotics and you're dumping large amounts of bacteria into your gut, you're causing the microbiome to be imbalanced in a whole other way. I've seen this over and over again. I've tried to use probiotics in the past. I tried to be laser focused with them and to only give people the ones that were low. I had some clients do microbiome testing where the company made their probiotics based on their test results, and they were only taking the probiotics for the species that were low, and none of it worked. It didn't matter how we tried to manipulate the microbiome with probiotics, whether we were surgical about it or broad about it, it never worked. We just spun the microbiome out in some other direction. With the advantage of being able to do testing, I was able to convince myself, like, there is no way to actually balance the microbiome with probiotics. It's not actually possible. And then the studies started coming out to confirm that, like, yeah, don't use probiotics anymore. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use prebiotics, but you have to make sure you don't have infection first. then they will be helpful. The microbiome thrives on food. That's why they live where all the food is, so that they can eat, thrive, and support our body function. Having foods that are prebiotic in nature is really important in general, but not if you have an infection. The hack is to find out if you have an infection and to treat it if it's present. Then you feed the microbiome, not a one-size-fits-all solution, and requires some testing. So is there a one-size-fits-all biohack burnout prevention? The answer is actually yes. Breathwork, breathing, heart math, and that's why I love heart math so much, because it's independent of a person's dynamic metabolic type, independent of what's going on. Everybody needs oxygen. That's the one universal thing. The quick coherence technique, as developed by the HeartMath Institute, meets that criteria most consistently. There are different types of breath work, right? There's box breathing, where you're holding your breath and counting 4 seconds in, you hold your breath, and then 8 seconds out. There are different breath work techniques where you're holding your breath, or you're blowing out through your mouth, or you're breathing in through your mouth. What separates those from the quick coherence technique, where you're only breathing through your nose, is that when you hold your breath, or when you breathe either in or out through your mouth, that's fight or flight inducing. That's causing stress. Whereas the quick coherence technique is preventing stress. There is a way that inducing stress to calm yourself down can actually work, but that's if you're an excess dynamic metabolic type only, because you're inducing stress. If you're an excess dynamic metabolic type, remember that there's junk that is obstructing your metabolism that needs to be mobilized. Holding your breath, breathing in and out through your mouth, things like that, inducing stress is going to mobilize the system. For people with an excess dynamic metabolic type, that breath work can be valuable. But for people with a deficient dynamic metabolic type, it will not be as useful, because again, you're depleted, you're deficient, and you're inducing stress, which costs energy. So you're going to deplete yourself more if you do that type of breathing on too consistent a basis. The quick coherence technique is kind of independent of all that, because it's just inducing calm, period. Whether you're an excess dynamic metabolic type or a deficient dynamic metabolic type, it doesn't actually matter, because the quick coherence technique is just bringing more oxygen into the body to run metabolism more efficiently. So whether it's because you have inflammation in your body, that's why they show that the quick coherence technique can help reduce inflammation, and they show that the quick coherence technique can actually build metabolism or build resiliency to stress, because it actually does both fairly balanced. It doesn't matter what dynamic metabolic type you are, you can actually get benefit from the quick coherence technique either way. And that's why I love it, because it doesn't harm anyone. There's no downside to doing the quick coherence technique, whereas there can be a downside to doing more stressful types of breath work if you don't have the dynamic metabolic type to suit it. The quick coherence technique is very simple. It's deceptively simple, but you're breathing through your nostrils only, and you're taking a very slow, quiet 5-second inhale and a very slow, quiet 5-second exhale through the nose only. Just in and out for 3 minutes. 3 times a day is recommended so that it builds momentum. So it's been shown through 30 years of research to build resiliency against stress. That is one biohack that I almost universally recommend to people, that I know works extremely well. The second biohack is know your dynamic metabolic type before you choose your biohack of choice. Knowing your dynamic metabolic type takes all the mystery out, saves you a world of hurt in trial and error and doing things that might actually make you worse instead of better. If you're not sure if you have burnout, I invite you to take our burnout assessment. Just visit our website, awakenedwellnessnow.com. If you know you have burnout and you want to find a solution, I invite you to join our 7-day metabolic reset challenge if you want to get a sense of how knowing your dynamic metabolic type can help you quickly move the needle in getting out of burnout. And if you want a deep dive, I invite you to our Wellness Warrior 9-week transformation program, where we teach you how to do your dynamic metabolic type and apply it to your life through the 4 pillars of wellness to get out of burnout for good. I hope you found this podcast useful. If you did, please like and subscribe to our channel so we can keep bringing you this content. Please share it with anyone that you think would benefit from it. Comment below if there was a biohack that you've tried or you wanted to try, but you weren't quite sure if it would suit you. So let me know what that is. If I missed any of them, happy to talk about them. For more information, visit awakenwellnessnow.com. If you want to know about our corporate burnout resolution programs, that's also on our website. And until next time, many, many blessings. Thank you as always for watching and listening.